Welcome to the DroidDevCast, a podcast brought to you by the team at Esper, bringing you the latest news, thoughtful discussion, and insights into all things Android DevOps, and open source software development. I'm your host, Rin Oliver, Platform Evangelist at Esper, and today I'm joined by Conn Byrne, Senior Vice President of Sales for North America and Europe for Worldnet Payments. Conn, thank you so much for joining me today.
Rin, great to be here, and thanks a million for inviting me along.
You're very welcome. So we're here this week to discuss Android mobile payments, the evolution of contactless payments, payment device certifications, and of course to talk a little bit more about Esper and WorldNet's partnership. So let's dive right into it. Can you tell me a little bit about WorldNet and the idea of omnichannel payments?
Yeah, absolutely. So WorldNet is primarily a payment gateway. So our focus is on the technical aspects of the payment industry. We've been around for quite a while at this stage. So we started back in 2007. And at that point, we were primarily an e-commerce or cardholder not present focused gateway. And really what that means is we're in the e-commerce space. We were looking at things like back office tokenization, recurring payments. So all of the stuff where the person making the transaction isn't actually at your retail or your business location when the payment comes through. So that was where we started for the first 4 or 5 years. And we then kind of identified it. We saw that there was a shift, particularly in the US market, where cardholders or retail merchants were being forced to switch from the old swipe method across to EMV. So once that mandate come in, it presented an opportunity for WorldNet to take some of the experience that we had developed in the European market around cardholder not present. We had also done some development in Europe around chip and PIN and face-to-face payments. So we took that learning and we did a bunch of development and certification for EMV and contactless devices in the US market. That basically left us in a position, a pretty unique position, where ahead of that US EMV mandate coming in, we had a range of certifications and we had the whole cardholder not present experience and solution developed. And it meant we had this, like I said, it's a unique offering where it's what we would call true omnichannel, where our clients, whether that's an actual end user or potentially a partner, or in this case, we're talking about independent software vendors or ISVs, those clients, by having one relationship with WorldNet, having one relationship with our gateway, they get access to all of our payment options. Again, whether that's card present or cardholder not present. So that was that kind of that flow or that evolution of the company, if you want to call it that, has left us in a really strong position, both in the European market, which is obviously our home market, and then here in the US, where we've seen huge expansion and growth over the last 5 or 6 years. And again, when we talk about omnichannel, it's certainly a word that people are probably becoming more and more familiar with. It's something that's becoming more important. So it's no longer, especially in these kind of pandemic days, it's no longer possible to just have a bricks and mortar store. A lot of people are moving to e-commerce. If you look at the restaurant trade over the last 7 or 8 months, they had to make a really quick change from being purely, in a lot of cases, from being purely bricks and mortar based. They went online, they set up in-app payments, they started doing curbside pickup, all of that kind of thing. And as those companies or merchants moved into those different spaces, that's where the benefit of an omnichannel payment solution comes in. So rather than having one provider for e-commerce and one provider for your curbside pickup, one provider for in-store, you work with somebody like a WorldNet, an omnichannel gateway, and we provide all of that to you in one source. And that's really, for us, what we see omnichannel as being. And as I said, there's been a massive growth in that over the last few years, but then that's been particularly accelerated with COVID over the last number of months.
Absolutely. So contactless payments, how did those fit into the omnichannel ecosystem?
So contactless payments they're really interesting. And I think when we speak about contactless, there's probably 2 main options or 2 main strands of it. So the first piece is contactless enabled credit or debit cards, which I think people in the US market are now starting to become more familiar with. I know this year a lot of US cardholders will have actually received new cards from their banks. Those cards will have that contactless logo on them, which means they can start to use it for tap payments. So that's one element, or that's one aspect of it. And that means when you go into a store, you see the terminal, and rather than having to insert your card or swipe your card, you just tap it, you hold it on the machine for a couple of seconds, put it back in your wallet, and that's the payment done. Um, Contactless payments have been around for quite a while, although they are new or relatively new here in the US. They have been around a long time. In places in Europe, you'd see acceptance of contactless payments up around the 50% mark. Places like Australia, it's actually up in the 90s. I know there was reports at the back end of last year that the US was less than 1%. So that just kind of shows how much scope for growth there is there. So that's the first type. That's your actual physical credit or debit card. The second option, and this is one that we're seeing as being really popular at the moment, is NFC contactless payments, and that's using a third-party device to actually make that payment. So rather than taking out your card, you're going to use your smartphone, your smartwatch. You're going to hold that, or you're going to tap that on the payment terminal, and that's going to make the payment for you. So you're actually using your phone. You're using a device that you're always going to have with you to make that payment. You can leave your card at home. You don't need to have that anymore. And I think for the US market in particular, because again they have that lower contactless acceptance rate that I mentioned earlier, at the moment, everybody or pretty much everybody in the US is going to have a smartphone of some sort, and a lot of people are going to have smartwatches and all the rest of it. So the fact that NFC payments is now becoming a lot more accepted, I would expect to see that actually grow pretty quickly over the coming years. So people may actually skip straight past the actual physical card and decide to go straight to their smartphone or smartwatch instead. In terms of where contactless fits in, to be honest, it fits in everywhere. So, and again, COVID and the whole pandemic has probably accelerated and kind of changed where contactless fits in. So again, I used the example earlier of a retail store. So if you go into your grocery store, you're going to be using contactless to tap the terminal and make your payment. If you're in the airport at this stage, if people even go to the airport anymore, I'm not so sure. But whenever people go back to the airport, as you walk through it, you're going to see lots of different kiosks in there. So it could be kiosks selling electrical goods. I've seen them selling cosmetics. I've seen them selling obviously drinks and crisps. So in those kind of solutions, they're going to have contactless there as well. So really, yeah, there can be so many different methods or ways to actually make a contactless payment. And like I said, when you're talking about an actual physical card, you're talking about using your phone. There's things like QR codes, which I'll probably go into more detail on later on. There's just so many different ways to actually make a payment now without ever having to actually take out your physical card to touch a terminal, and in some cases even have any interaction with an actual human at the other side of it.
Absolutely. I actually, I'm very intrigued by both of these. I spent the last 4 years living in New Zealand, and I can confirm that their touchless payment solutions are prevalent there. Everywhere you go, you just hold your card and you can just pay for something. It's all over New Zealand, and they just don't have that here in the States yet. And in Shanghai, when I was visiting there, you just scanned a QR code and you paid for your goods. That was it. That was all you did.
Exactly. Yeah. And QR codes is a funny one. And I think, yeah, I'll probably discuss it later, but QR codes is one where I know our CEO mentioned this during the week, that if somebody said to him, we need to develop a QR code solution a year ago, you'd look at them and go, why? Like who's going to need QR code? But you put a pandemic in, people are obviously wary about keeping their distance and limiting contact and everything like that. And all of a sudden, a QR code is now just this really vital piece of technology when it comes to payments and so much other stuff. So yeah, it's a really interesting kind of flip. It's been a long time since I've scanned a QR code, and then in the last 6 months, I've probably scanned them more than ever at restaurants and things like that. So yeah, it's kind of cool.
Absolutely. I think so too. And speaking of COVID-19, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected that payment ecosystem? And how has contactless payment adoption changed since the beginning of 2021?
Yeah,
Or 2020 rather. Wrong year.
Yeah, we're nearly 2021. We're almost there. Honestly, I would see it has really just accelerated the move towards contactless. So the US market was already moving towards contactless, but people like the banks and card issuers, they were kind of slow to issue cards because there wasn't a huge demand. So if somebody had a debit card or a credit card and it didn't have a contactless chip, they weren't really in a rush to issue a new one because the customer didn't want one. With COVID, that has changed. So people now perceive credit card terminals as being kind of a potentially a touch point that they don't want to use, or it's one touch point they may be able to limit. And contactless cards are great for that. Like you said, you kind of tap it or almost hover over it in some cases, and that's going to take a payment. So yeah, I would certainly see COVID has accelerated the acceptance or the adoption of contactless payments. So I certainly see that as being a good thing, and that's probably a great thing. And the thing I found with contactless, if you go back to the Irish market, where would be our home market, contactless payments have been there for a good while at this stage, maybe probably 6-7 years. At the start, it was kind of small. People used it for like 10-15 euro transactions. But as people then got more used to it, they're kind of going, I'd actually want to pay for stuff that's more valuable. And the limit then increased to 30, changed up to 50. So as people start using it, that convenience and just being able to tap it and walk away, rather than leave your card inserted or swipe it and wait for a signature or whatever else it may be, the convenience of that is just it's brilliant. So yeah, I certainly see it as a good thing. One of the other areas then are I suppose that we've seen an acceleration or growth in certain payment methods due to COVID, or kind of accelerated thanks to COVID, would be in the unattended retail space or smart retail kiosks. And again, I mentioned airports earlier. I think when we go back to airports next time, you're probably going to see there may have been 1-2 kiosks there last time, but when you go through it this time, the lobbies and hallways are going to be filled with kiosks, because everyone is just seeing this as being a great way to get your product in front of people everywhere. So a kiosk can be, like I said, it's in an airport, it could be in a college campus, it can be in supermarkets, it can be wherever, and you can have lots of different kiosks. And a kiosk sits there, it has its product in it, and people go up and they interact, and you don't have to have staff looking after it, you don't have to have security looking after it, all of that kind of thing. So unattended kiosks, although they were growing pretty rapidly beforehand, the fact that it's now taking away a touch point, as in that point where you have to actually go face to face with the person on the other side of the counter or the till or whatever it may be, it's actually removing that, and a lot of people seem to be flocking towards it. So unattended kiosks, again, a huge area of growth, and they're popping up in all sorts of areas. So things like obviously car washes, parking machines. You look at the likes of Amazon Go, and they're actual smart retail stores where there's not even any people in there. So yeah, they're becoming really popular. And then the other thing, again, I mentioned this earlier, the kind of surprise package from COVID is the QR code, which, as I said, is making a comeback. And the QR code is great because it can be used pretty much for everything. So what we see is things like restaurants. Maybe you scan there's going to be a QR code on the table, and you maybe scan that to look at a menu. We have some customers at the moment who are kind of looking at solutions around there. Otherwise, you might see, again, you actually couple a QR code with a kiosk, where you can control a kiosk based on a QR code. So when you walk to a kiosk, you scan a QR code, and you can actually control that kiosk with your phone rather than even having to touch the kiosk. And again, we've got partners who are doing that. So the QR code is really, it's really coming back, and the flexibility it gives in terms of you can generate a QR code for anything. It's been a real success, I think, of COVID, and I feel like that's probably something that obviously once COVID is gone and people are more comfortable, I think it probably will hang around longer than just through the pandemic. So really interesting to see how these things go once things start to return to some kind of normality.
I agree completely. And what's your advice to those solution builders who are thinking about contactless payment offerings? What would you tell them to focus on?
So I think the first thing I would tell them to focus on is probably flexibility, and that probably sounds like a strange answer, but maybe I can explain it more. So, as these solution providers are kind of scrambling to try and find, okay, well, actually, what do I do here to kind of combat COVID and help my customers and generate more business? As they're doing that, there's kind of potential for them to fall into the trap of just picking the first solution that they see. They go, okay, I want contactless. This provider provides contactless, I'm going to go with them. So what I'd say is, when they're actually trying to evaluate their solution, kind of take a step back and look at the provider that's going to offer you the most flexibility in terms of not just contactless, but do they have an omnichannel gateway? Can I use contactless, as I said earlier, in a grocery store kind of environment? Do they have a kiosk solution? Do they have a QR code solution? Can I do e-commerce? And all of the rest of the things I've mentioned. So that would be really, I think, that would be really a good kind of takeaway point, is just kind of take your time to think about it, look at flexibility. Oops, sorry, I've just dropped my headset. Sorry. Cool, I'm back. So just look at flexibility. What solution is going to work for you and your customers right now, and then what solution is actually going to allow you to grow and expand your payment methods past just contactless. And maybe it's a case that you pick a partner that actually allows you to consolidate, and instead of having like I said earlier, 5, 6 different solutions. You pull it all together, you get one streamlined service. It gives you your contactless as well as the other omnichannel solutions I mentioned. And I think one of the other things, and again, we're seeing a lot of our clients do this with COVID, it's really important to look at all of those human-to-human touch points that we've mentioned and see, is there ways that we can actually, are there clever ways that we can actually reduce those touch points or eliminate them and replace them with some kind of contactless solution instead. And again, when I say contactless, I mean contactless in terms of actual contactless payments, and then contactless in terms of you don't have to talk to people or touch people or kind of touch payment terminals that other people have touched, and that's probably your kiosks and QR codes. So yeah, I think that's probably it. Just try and give yourself flexibility and build a solution that's going to do more than just contactless.
That makes a lot of sense. So moving to a totally different thing, let's hear a little bit more about WorldNet. Can you tell me a little bit more about WorldNet's certification process and any contactless payment solutions that you've certified?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really, I think our certifications and the way we manage certifications and how we've done certifications to date, that's actually our probably our biggest selling point. And that's the reason why we found so much success with ISVs recently. So if you look at the payments environment, there's certain things that you have to do to be allowed to take payments in a I suppose a certified manner or in an approved manner. One of those things is any piece of payment hardware that you look at. So again, if you look at a payment terminal sitting in your grocery store, to use that payment terminal, you have to integrate that terminal, and then you have to get that terminal certified with your gateway in this case. And once that certification is complete, you can then use that, or you can offer it to your customers to use. That certification process has historically been a huge stumbling block. It was not so much of an issue when people were just swiping, but once you bring EMV and contactless payments into it, that kind of takes it to a whole new level. So it's a much more complex certification. Some cases it could take 6 months, in some cases it could take 9 months. So it's a time consuming and not very cost effective process to do. So what WorldNet did, again, if you go back to kind of 2013, 2014, when we knew that this push to EMV was going to be coming in the US market, we actually went ahead and we did a lot of new EMV and contactless certifications at that point. And I think the unique thing that we did, we didn't only certify payment terminals or payment hardware, we actually bundled that hardware with our software SDK and made this package and certified that whole package. And what that means is any software solution or software provider, if they want to upgrade, and we mentioned contactless, if they want to add contactless to their solution, all they need to do is just integrate our SDK, and then they get to use our gateway, and they're covered by all of our certifications. So it's a really unique proposition, and basically it means if a provider or a solution provider wants to get up and running with an EMV or a contactless solution, they can do it within a matter of weeks and not months. And I know we actually did that with Esper probably this time last year. So I think it took maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks to actually get a full integration done and have a pilot at a trade show between our two companies. So I think that's a pretty good example of how quick it can be.
That definitely is. Actually, let's go into a little bit more about that. WorldNet and Esper. Let's touch on that partnership. How are we working together? What are some of the exciting things we're doing? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So obviously with Esper, your big focus is on the Android kind of environment. And we have seen a huge push towards Android, particularly over the last maybe 2 or 3 years. So if you look at our platform, obviously, I mentioned things like e-commerce, we can do all that, and that's obviously not platform specific. But when you move into our SDK and you look at unattended kiosk payments, or if you look at a retail point of sale, so many of those are now built on the Android platform. So Android obviously has huge benefits and a lot of different benefits, and people are really flocking to it. So what we have seen in terms of the partnership between ourselves, there's an overlap in terms of Esper provides all of the management capability for Android hardware or fleets of Android hardware. WorldNet provides the payment solutions that actually go onto those fleets of hardware to allow the merchants to accept payments. So there's this unique overlap where we're both actually servicing the same kinds of customers, but just from different sides. And I think where our partnership is really strong is actually trying to find, okay, well, actually, where does that overlap and how can we join together, or how have we come together to actually service our mutual clients or potential clients in the future in a more streamlined manner by combining our services. So I think we're probably a couple of years into the relationship at this stage, and I think as every month goes by, we all learn something more about each other, and again, the demand for Android grows. So it's certainly a partnership we're really excited about and look forward to seeing where it can take us.
Absolutely, I agree completely. So lastly, let's dive into a little bit more about the Esper and WorldNet partnership and certifications there. Why should someone choose to work with Esper and WorldNet? What are they getting when they do that?
Yeah, really, I think that's a really good question. And I suppose I touched on, or we've touched on lots of different elements of it so far. But for me, the biggest thing that this partnership, the Esper WorldNet partnership offers, it offers flexibility. It offers flexibility through one kind of single source. So if you want to develop an Android solution, or if you're in the process of developing it, or maybe switching to Android, if you come and work with WorldNet and Esper, we obviously both have our expertise in certain areas. From the payments perspective, WorldNet becomes just one single point of contact or one single source that you can work with and integrate with. Through that integration, then you get the option to choose multiple different payment hardware providers. So with our certifications, we work with people like Ingenico, IDTech, PAX, and BBPOS, which they'd be four of the major providers, and they provide hardware to lots of different areas of the market. Again, covering things like mobile payments, unattended, and standard point of sale. So if you don't go for somebody like WorldNet, as I mentioned earlier, you can end up with multiple providers. So if you want to use an unattended terminal, you might have one solution. If you want to use ePOS or point of sale, you may have another. And again, by using us, we become the kind of sticking point in the middle that all of these different certifications come off. The other part to it then, and it's something I probably haven't mentioned just yet, when I say that we're certified primarily to the bigger processors, which would be First Data and TSYS. And again, that means you've got flexibility. There's a lot of providers out there that will shoehorn you into their own payment solution and say, yeah, you have to come with us. Generally, what that means is you're going to pay higher rates there. In our case, we're going to add flexibility to the mix. So if you say, well, actually, I already have a merchant account with First Data and I want to keep using that, okay, we can let you do that. Otherwise, we can say, let's look at our partnerships. Is there a reduction in rates that we can offer by switching you? So again, we're not trying to push you in a certain direction, but we have different options. So really, for me, I think that flexibility, the kind of ease of integration. Again, we're talking about a couple of weeks instead of months, and lots of money for a certification. That's a massive point as well. And then again, when you put Esper's, as I said, Android management solutions on top of that, and all the rest of the features you guys can offer, it really just does give you this bundle solution that takes care of anything that you need, whether that's payments or device related.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the DroidDevCast. We'll be back next week with another exciting show for you. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode on social media. You can also follow us on Twitter at EsperDev and subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep up with all the latest happenings here at Esper. You can learn more about Esper and WorldNet's joint payment solutions for Android ISVs by booking a joint 30-minute meeting. You can start a conversation at esper.io/demo or worldnetpayments.com/contact. You can listen to the DroidDevCast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Simplecast, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you so much for listening.